Welcome everybody to today's webinar. My name is Susan Hedstrom. I'm the Executive Director for FPWR and I will be moderating today's session. Today's webinar is keeping your loved one with PWS safe on the internet. Whether COVID has your loved one online more than before or your child is just of age, we know that you want to keep them safe. So today we're bringing together two experts in their own right. First, we have Elizabeth Roof, Senior Research Associate at Vanderbilt University. She'll be talking to us a little bit today about the social needs of people with PWS and the upsides as well as the downsides of social medias and Zoom groups for our loved ones. Following Elizabeth, we'll have Lisa Mattisbach. She is our Path Study Coordinator at FPWR and also is a parent of a teenager with PWS. Lisa will be sharing with us some steps that you can take to help keep your loved one safe online. So without any further ado, I'd like to bring you Elizabeth, who will share with you a little bit about PWS and socialization. Elizabeth?
Thanks, Susan. Thanks for actually doing this. I'm sure a lot of parents are like, gosh, you should have done this in March of last year. This would have been really helpful. But I think we've learned a lot of lessons about PWS, about online social groups, and kind of what the needs with people with PWS are. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about what their needs are, what their wants are, and then talk a little bit about some of the behavior and personality characteristics of PWS that may actually kind of make online groups and social media challenging because of some of the behavior issues. Next slide. So people with PWS, I think you have to really kind of listen to what they say and what they do, because sometimes as parents, we often go, oh, well, they're lonely, they need friends. And that's because you're lonely and you need friends. And so my thought is it's important to kind of know that sometimes their social needs may be different than yours as far as the intensity, the frequency, the closeness, the intimacy of kinds of social relationships, they may be different. So I think it's really important to kind of know that your needs don't necessarily translate into their needs. So I would listen to cues like if they say things like, I'm lonely, or I don't have any or many friends, people don't like to hang out with me or talk with me. Like I reach out to people and they don't respond to me, or I text friends and they don't, say anything back. Or they say things like, I wish I had any or more friends. Those to me point to a sense of social isolation, loneliness, and a need for social relationships. But if they say stuff like, well, I don't have anything to do, or I'm bored, or I wish I had something fun to do, or I'd like to do something somewhere besides being at home, which all of us feel, that's more about boredom and kind of activity and fun and things like that. And so I think you have to kind of listen to what your kid is telling you that they want and need versus what we think they need. And I think for a lot of parents, and I'll be very honest, because we've been running some Zoom groups and I'm doing a lot of kind of like consulting with families, is that a lot of parents trying to work at home, school their kids at home, laundry, cooking, fill in the blank, housework. It's really difficult to kind of manage all these activities. So when your kid is hanging out, online and they're not bothering you, you're like, everything is just great. So I think we have to really kind of be aware that what we think that they need may not be really what they need. Next slide. So one thing that we really focus a lot on is social motivation. So when you think of people who have autism, right? They're not necessarily socially motivated. They don't talk about being lonely. They don't talk about not having friends. They may want things to do, but it's not so much about the social aspect. And so I know when we did our social skills group several years ago, the one thing that we found is if people were not socially motivated, they didn't necessarily do great when it came to social kinds of groups and things like that. And so is your kid one of those people who's interested in what other people are doing or saying? Are they always watching other kids and kind of listening to what they say? Do they watch others, but they can't really join in? It's like watching a game of jump rope, right? Kids are interacting or doing a thing, and your kid is just kind of watching, kind of waiting to take their turn. And by the time they get ready to respond, that part of the conversation's over. So should they volunteer something? It's a little bit too little, too late. So are they that? Do they seem interested, but they don't necessarily say or do the right things? And so again, knowing that they do those things helps us know that they're socially motivated, they're interested in others, but they often seem to lack understanding of social cues, like what's okay to do, what's not okay to do. They don't necessarily learn from watching other people interact socially. And I think that's something that typical kids definitely do. We watch kids going, oh, that's a big fail, or don't want to do that. Or look at that kid, she's so popular. I see how she compliments other kids or asks them questions and is interesting and things like that. And so kids with PWS, you literally have to kind of almost hand over hand show and tell them how to be social. So I think it's something that parents don't often know. They can't just watch you or siblings and go, oh yeah, I got this. Or are they more like this? Do they play alone? Are they not really interested in what other people are doing? If you have a play date, are they in another room doing their own thing? And is it more important for them to do things their way than conform to a group? So if you've been in groups before, is your kid the one who's, like in a soccer group, hanging out on the sideline, looking at bugs? Or are they the ones that are actually participating and trying to go along with the rules? And if they like to watch, if they want to have other people watch them play, but not play with them or parallel play, then that to me speaks to some level of development of social motivation where they're not quite there yet. So I think you have to kind of look at what your kid is at developmentally and socially and try to figure out where's the best fit. And so again, it's this idea of almost like a decision tree. And if they're really struggling with social motivation, it's a little bit like having a car. If there's no gas in the car, it doesn't matter where you want to go or how good a driver you are, right? You can't go anywhere. Social motivation is the gas and the car that drives it someplace. So if they don't have that, then you have to start with that first. And for some kids, I just want you to know they're not socially motivated. And even as adults, they don't seem to be lonely or isolated, even though they don't have a group of friends. So just be aware, for some people, family members, therapists, teachers can actually serve the purpose that we would think that friends would serve. So for some kids, that's kind of where it's at, because more adults and younger kids are more likely to kind of let them have their way and kind of go along with the flow than typical peers. Next slide. So I think the idea of like in-person versus online social activity. So I think you have to kind of look at before the pandemic, which was the big giant rate limiting factor, right? So when that happened, everybody is at home and everybody's options are kind of online. So where and how did your child do best? So like if you think about them in school settings and other social and like clubs or sports, like how did they do best? Were they a great in-person learner? They needed the teacher's kind of attention, feedback? Do they need the proximity of an in-person kind of close to them, kind of telling them, sometimes even physically touching them to redirect them? Did they participate well in groups, sports, classroom, social activities? If you think about your kid as being kind of a social, butterfly and being able to kind of go along with the norms, then my thought is that tells you a lot about their social motivation and also their skill level. But if they struggled in person, online can even be harder than that, because it's this idea of passive, versus active participation. I know kids who parents will say, well, my kid is very social. They love watching YouTube videos or TikTok videos. That's not social interaction. That's passive viewing. And so, being an old man yelling at the news or a football team doesn't make me a football player or a news anchor. It just makes me somebody who's passively viewing an event and commenting on it. So again, be aware of what the reality and kind of this idea of, kind of like maybe the stretch that we're making when we say our kids are social, even though they're not doing anything that's really socially interactive. How good are they at reading social cues and the motivation of other people? Are they good at understanding when people are angry or upset or happy and welcoming them to play? Like, do they understand those things? And realizing that past behavior is a really good indicator of future behavior. If your kid has had multiple conflicts with limit setting or, manipulating or, aggression or any of those things, being online may make them not hit another kid, but it may not make them not kind of like, lash out or do things that are hurtful or whatever else. So just be aware, think of your kid, assess their kind of past behavior, figure out what the kind of pitfalls are, and know that those will maybe continue to be an issue when they're online versus in person. Next slide. So online social groups, I think you have to kind of figure out, are they right for your kid? Does your kid have tech skills? Do you have tech skills? I have none. So, I mean, my thought is if I had to monitor my kids' online, social presence, thank God they're both adults, that would be really hard. What's their level of maturity? Do they seem fairly mature? And I don't mean just talking the talk, but I mean walking the walk, where it means that they give and take, there's reciprocity in their conversation, they're willing to compromise, give in sometimes. Are they able to participate in virtual settings via the classroom? Because most kids have been doing that, for months now. Are they good at that? Are they adept at that? Are they participating in those things? Are they asking questions of online classmates? Are they involved in, projects or, anything like that, like where they put them into kind of small Zoom group rooms or things like that? Are they able to do those things and ask questions? Do they respond appropriately to other people? Or do they just kind of do their own thing? Are they able to manage limits and boundaries? So again, it's really important to kind of know how your kid manages those things And do they understand online rules and norms? So this is okay, this is not okay. And people often try to be very subtle or sarcastic or funny. Kids with PWS don't get that. I often think it's really helpful to have a list of rules right beside their laptop or on their laptop so they can always know what's okay and what's not okay. Because the deal is for a lot of kids, they don't necessarily understand the abstract or the kind of, more kind of higher level rules. It has to be pretty concrete. So it's up to you to kind of help them navigate that and come up with some rules that work for them online and will keep them safe. Next slide. So if I break the rules virtually, are there real world consequences? And it's really interesting because this is true of typical people, right? You do stuff and you think, it's anonymous, who will know, It's this idea that we have to kind of realize that, there are some real world consequences for things that we do. So is your kid asking people personal questions about, phone numbers or emails or friends or whatever else? Are they doing things that would make you uncomfortable if they were doing it in person? Because the deal is it should make you uncomfortable if they're doing it online. It's not completely risk-free just to be virtual. Are they asking for pictures of people? And this is including, full body with clothes, full body without clothes. Are they doing those things? And again, if you don't know, you should definitely, kind of assess where your kid's at. I've had many parents say, well, I'm sure my kid's not doing that until it becomes a problem. Are they asking other people in the group to do things out of the group? Or they're like, oh, we've got the small group, but hey, I'd like to Zoom with you personally, or, I'd like you to be my girlfriend or boyfriend, or any other request. And so my thought is you need to give your kid the vocabulary and the ability to, maybe what it is I have to ask my mom to do anything like that, or my dad. I have to check, I have to get permission to do anything like that, because we've had multiple kids who've gotten involved in this and then they want to stop and they feel like they can't. They're kind of trapped, right? Because they're not supposed to be doing it anyway. Are they saying things to upset others? Are they threatening others? And again, we've had these experiences in some of our groups and small chat rooms where people are texting things that are, or chatting things that are not okay to say. And they seem to think that no one's ever going to know about them, except people with PWS have big mouths and they tell each other. So we always find out. Are they using school times to talk to friends on Zoom? So should they be in their class with their classmates, but they're like, I'm having this other. You can't pay attention to two things. Anyone who tells me they can multitask like that, I'm like, not really. Are they spending lots of hours online and out of view? Because if they are, you don't know what they're doing. And do they get upset when you place limits? Like if you say, you can have your iPad or whatever for this many hours or for this time or only after school or only after you finish, do they get upset? I think the reality it tells you is that there is a part of that that's really hard for them to stop. And safety tops wants every time. So regardless of what they want, if they're not safe, you've got to intervene. Next slide. So ways to help them monitor and manage social groups in PWS is kind of looking at limits, boundaries, monitoring for safety. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that. And Lisa has a lot more information on that. But this idea that we can do things online, and I'm going to talk about some of the personality characteristics that may be kind of harder for them to actually manage some of the online activities. Next slide. So some of the core features that make it harder, sorry, I obviously misspelled, obsessional thinking is what I should have said. So they have a hard time stopping. If they are interested in something or somebody asks them a question or they want to know a thing, they can't stop. So when we open that Pandora's box that is all that is social media and online presence, we're also kind of opening the box to obsessional thinking, right? And that goes along with boyfriend and girlfriend. People think it's pretty innocuous and pretty typical and whatever else. Except for them, it sometimes has a weird stalkerish quality and they have a hard time stopping because they really, if they text you once, they text you 27 times. And for some families, it becomes very disruptive. It becomes a big problem for their family. And the kid with PWS can't stop. Also, their compulsive behavior. If they do something a little, they want to do it a lot. If they have one pen, they have 100 pens, right? So a little is never enough. And so you have to be aware that by setting limits, you help with impulse control, you help with compulsive behavior, and you help with obsessional thinking. Testing rules and limits is another thing that people will do with PWS. And like, I know I've had many parents ask me, like, do they know that's okay? That's not okay. They can often tell you that they know that it's not okay to text a friend and ask for, a picture of their private area, or to try to get somebody offline to have a personal conversation that's really inappropriate. But the deal is they do it because they're not sure they're going to get caught. So they need limits, right? We wouldn't open our kitchen and go, I'm sure everything will be fine. I'm sure they can really, inhibit all those impulses to eat. We wouldn't do that. It wouldn't be safe. Think of the internet as this idea of kind of leaving something open. And, We're not going to leave it open without supervision and monitoring and safety things because they can't stop. If your kid has had a problem with lying in the past, know that they may be lying to you now. Like they may say, I didn't do that thing, or I didn't, change your password, or I didn't change the safety controls you put on. If they're doing those things, again, kids with PWS often lie. And the reason they lie is they don't want to get in trouble. They know they're going to be in trouble. So again, just knowing that that's kind of some of the personality features that we talk about in PWS, we want to make sure that we, basically assess them, know them ahead of time. Oppositional. If you tell me what to do, I'm going to do just the opposite. So again, there should be some consequences for some of those things so that you're not constantly fighting the battle. Because for a lot of parents, they're tired of the pandemic. They're tired of supervision. They're tired of parenting. I totally get that. But the reality is just because you're tired of it doesn't mean you don't have to do it anymore. It's just kind of what it is. And the manipulation part where they may actually say or do things that they've done in the past, if they don't think they're going to get caught, they're very likely to keep doing those things. So just be aware that we have to kind of help them make the best of their choices and opportunities and not the worst. And again, know your child. Every kid with PWS is different. Some kids have no problems being online. They're just dreamboats, and that's awesome. But if your kids had problems in the past, know their limits, know where you need to intervene and supervise, and make sure you're monitoring their activity. Because again, it is easy for them to think they're talking to a 15-year-old boy with PWS they've never met before, and it to be a 45-year-old man who's somewhere else and doesn't have PWS. So just be aware, know their parents, have ways to contact them. All those things are really important to keep your kids safe, because I think at the end of the day, it's an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, right? So we would much rather prevent these things from happening than constantly having to play whack-a-mole with this problem and that problem. And for some kids, it really means limiting their amount of time online, their access to Zoom groups, and some of the other things because they can't limit them. And you don't have time to supervise them. And if you don't, they shouldn't be just completely just cruising around on the internet, hopefully being safe, because you can't count on that. So I'm going to actually turn it over to Lisa, who's going to talk much more about the technical parts and much more about the concrete kinds of logistics of how you do it. Thanks.
Hi, everyone. My name is Lisa Mattisvac, and I am the Path for PWS Study Coordinator for the Foundation for Prader-Willi Research, and I'm also the mother of a teenage boy with Prader-Willi syndrome. And so the idea for this webinar sort of came out of an organic conversation with Elizabeth as I was navigating some of these potential challenges with my own child. And so I started thinking about, where do we begin? What do I need to do to keep my son with Prader-Willi syndrome safe and ensure the safety of those that he's communicating with? So I wanted to first identify what the pitfalls were. So what are the biggest risks? Where could he go wrong? What are my challenges? And where do I need to start to keep these things from happening in the future? And importantly, I have to know that I need to reevaluate what these needs are as he becomes more savvy. I need to be equally as savvy or ahead of his ability to navigate these things in order to prevent them from happening. So one of the things that we can do as parents is to limit the Wi-Fi access. And so I put on here a link when I did some searches online. So the how to use your router's parental controls is an article on CNET. You'll see some other links throughout this presentation. You can search for them and find more information. One of the things that you can do is establish access times for your child. So on my personal Wi-Fi router, I grouped everything that belongs to my son with Prader-Willi syndrome that is a device that connects to Wi-Fi. So we have a group, and there are set times when that device is connected or those devices are connected to Wi-Fi, and set times when they are not connected to Wi-Fi. I also have the ability to pause his access. So if he is not, adhering to something I'm asking him to do because he's so, singularly focused on playing a game, I can cut that off and move him on to the next thing. You can also use your Wi-Fi router to restrict access to websites. It's particularly important, I have found, to block certain things that you wouldn't want your child visiting online. If you do this using your internet browser, you do have to do this website blocking for each individual type of browser. So you might use Google, but maybe your child uses Edge or Safari or Firefox. So it's important to know how to set those website blocking limitations on each browser that they may choose to bring up onto for any searches that they may do. In particular, because Google is one that is commonly used, you can enable something called safe search. So when you bring up the Google website, on the bottom right corner, it says settings. If you click that and click search settings, you can turn on this safe search option, which limits some adult content and other things that you as a parent can have some control over. Next slide, please. So other things to consider, our needs for our children with Prader-Willi syndrome go beyond just, giving them timeouts to access to internet and limiting websites. We have to be very diligent at all times and monitor the things that could create challenges for them. So for example, you would want to consider routinely reviewing their internet browsing history. You may have an idea of what they're accessing and what they say they're visiting, but in fact, are they truly going to other sites that you may not know about? So going into the browser history and looking to see what they've been looking at, what websites they've been visiting is really important. One of the things that I think we have less control over as parents, if your child with PWS is somebody who's school aged and they're using school technology, I would be asking questions about how is that school technology secured, because chances are you won't have the ability to make modifications to that as you will not be an administrator on that computer. But I think it's important to ask the school those questions and find out what you can do to ensure that that technology is secured in the same way you would ensure security on your personal devices at home. Other things that I know a lot of our loved ones with Prader-Willi syndrome do is some of them have phones or have iPads or tablets, and they may use iMessages or other ways to text and message others. So I have found that my son can be particularly savvy with deleting messages. So I started to look for ways to recover some of those messages and ensure that what he was sending out was something that was appropriate. And I've sort of told him a rule: if it's not something you'd say to mom or dad, then it's not okay to say it to other people. So there is a way to go back in and recover messages that have been deleted from your iPhone if it's an Apple product your child is using. And again, there's a link to do that. If there was no backup of the device completed, then you can recover deleted iMessages with software that you can download. You can also, if both the parent and guardian and the loved one with Prader-Willi syndrome have iMessage, have Apple product technology, you can link the phones and the tablets so that you use the same iCloud account and have the iMessages sent that from your child or adult with PWS from their technology to yours, so you can monitor it that way. If you're somebody who uses Android products, there is a way to retrieve those text messages from Android phones if they're backed up to the cloud. So again, another link to how to recover those deleted messages if you're suspicious that your child may have sent something that you want to investigate further. Another thing you want to do or consider doing is parental control software to track internet usage. So screen time, web filtering, those things, like I said, can be done with the router, but another way to do it is using software. You can monitor text and emails. You can monitor social media. I listed a few of the different technology that you can choose to look at that have been rated highly for these types of monitoring. All of them have different capabilities, and some of them do come with a cost. But at the end of the day, if that's what helps keep your loved one safe, then it may be something to consider. Another thing that I think is important is not knowing just what website your loved one visited, but what is on that website. So one of the things that I have found particularly tricky is YouTube, but so many people use YouTube and there's great content on there. I know for my son in school, they use YouTube often for their history and science lessons. However, there's a lot of material and things on there that you may not want your person with PWS viewing. So there are ways to go through and enable a restricted mode setting. You could choose to block YouTube altogether and consider an alternative like YouTube Kids, which allows for more parental controls. I've found YouTube a little more tricky to establish boundaries, but there are ways to do that where you can delete your past history or say you don't like these videos and it won't suggest future ones to you. However, I have not found a very foolproof way of restricting content on that website as much as I would like to. So next slide, please. So that brings us to the other topic, which is what Elizabeth was touching on, which are FaceTime and Zoom groups. I know my son uses Apple products, so we do a lot of FaceTime, but those allow for socialization, but we want to make sure that that socialization is appropriate and safe. So one of the things that you can do as a parent is establish relationships with other parents in that online social circle. So encourage open communication, find out who these parents are, contact them, reach out to them, exchange, phone numbers, contact information. What's the best way to get in touch with you? Stay in communication with those parents, get to know them. I sort of think of it in the same way as if I was to send my child out to a neighbor's house to play with their child. I want to know that parent. I would want to know, what goes on in that home. I would want to know, a little bit more about the family before I just send my child to a stranger's house to visit. So really trying to connect with those other families will help ensure that our children are learning the proper social skills along the way to interact appropriately. Another thing to consider is potentially assigning a parent or guardian to monitor the communications during the Zoom or chat. If there's a couple of people with PWS all chatting and Zooming together, maybe one parent takes the responsibility for acting as sort of a moderator of sorts. So if there is an opportunity to mitigate something that's coming up or a problem that's happening, the parent or guardian is right there to take care of it. The other thing to consider is choosing a safe place in your home where these conversations can be monitored. I've set up some boundaries for my own son where, when he's online, he is not doing that behind closed doors. It's out in an open space where he can be monitored by myself or his dad, and so that his communications are always kept above board. Another thing that you can do is set up features to prevent strangers from entering conversations. So this is particularly, I think, important as it is very easy to add in other people into conversations. You might be in a group of people using FaceTime or Zoom, and somebody adds somebody else in or sends somebody the link to a Zoom and says, come on in and join our group. But do you really want other people joining that maybe you don't know? And maybe it's a person with PWS, or maybe it's not. And maybe that's okay. But I think that there's reasons to be asking those questions about who is your child interacting with. So in particular, again, with Apple products, iPads and iPhones, you can allow limiting FaceTime to only those in your contact list. So I have done this where there is a contact list. If somebody is not in that contact list and another individual tries to add them to the chat, it doesn't allow that to occur. FaceTime can also be disabled on a Mac computer using the parental controls and the system preferences. So if you just want to take away that opportunity altogether, you can do that. You can delete the app on an iPhone or iPad as well. In regards to Zoom, there are features that can give you control over who enters into the meeting. So again, there's a link to the information. If you Google that, you can find this article that gives you step-by-step directions on how to do that, such as creating a waiting room where there's one person that authorizes who's allowed in, or you can lock the meeting so that even if the code gets given out or somebody shares the link, nobody else can enter, so it's locked. Or creating a password that, again, only those with the password have access to entering. Next slide, please. So the iPhone and the iPad, there are a number of parental controls that can be implemented on these devices. There's a link to that through the Apple support page. You can find this under the settings and particularly going to screen time. And here's a list, from the Apple website of things that you can restrict or set guidelines for. One would be setting some restrictions on the content and privacy restrictions. What level of rating do you want your child to have access to when it comes to movies and TV shows and other things that they may be watching? You can prevent their ability to download new apps in the iTunes store, or prevent purchases when they're inside an app. And you can do this by setting up something called Ask to Buy. So it'll send a message to the person who has the parental control, and it'll alert you that your loved one is trying to make a purchase or download something, and you can choose to give permission or you can choose to say no. You can prevent explicit content. You can limit their web searches, their Siri searches. Game Center is where you can restrict their ability to interact with people, all over the world, because some of these games allow them to interact with people outside of the home. And you might want to consider what that could involve and what that might mean for your child or adult with PWS. You might want to limit, again, those contacts to only those that are in the contact list. And if you set up this parental restriction, then the parent is in control of who goes on the contact list. The person with PWS cannot make those additions. You can set time limits for the apps so that there are times when they are allowed to play and times when they are not. And you can schedule downtime from the screen. So, it goes off during these hours and you can access it during these hours. And then the other thing to consider is, do you want to allow location services to be on? That might be a way that your child could send information to somebody about where they are, and maybe you don't want them to do that. So think about what location services might potentially be a challenge for you or your loved one, and how to set restrictions on that. And then you can also prevent passcode changes, because if your loved one is like mine and you've set a passcode, they will instantly try to change that and lock you out. So I learned very quickly to set a restriction so that he cannot do that. Next slide, please. And the last thing that we're going to talk about is just Androids. Now, Android phones and tablets are a little more tricky. Parental controls may vary between devices. Again, there's a link to some more information, but you do have some ability to limit the content rating for games and music and movies. You can set up web filtering, and you can restrict or monitor data usage and any downloads and purchases through the Google Play Store. Restricted profiles can be made on tablets, but not on smartphones. So, you have to sort of think about what is the technology that best fits the needs of my loved one with Prader-Willi syndrome. Am I going to be able to put into play the parental controls that I would like for my loved one to have in order for them to be as safe? So the restricted profile feature does not provide a way to restrict adult content access through Google Chrome or other web browsers. So I think that's sort of important to note, because restricting adult content for me, for a teenager, is important, and that's something I would want to make sure I'm able to do. To limit adult content, you can download a parental control or web filtering app from the Play Store. So that is one way to sort of get around that. Or you can set up those parental controls again on the router, but that only works if you're at home and using Wi-Fi. So if your child is going to school with their technology and they're connecting to other Wi-Fi, or they're out in the community and using the internet, those restrictions are not going to be in play for you. So just kind of think about that those are things that only work on the device from which you set it up. And then there are ways to manage the parental controls on your tablet or the parental controls on your Android phone, and I gave some instructions there. But again, some of these things may vary from device to device, so it's just important to learn what your device capabilities are and how to best ensure those features are able to be enabled for your individual and what their specific needs are. So that was sort of the end of what I wanted to be able to present today about ways in which we can keep our children safe. And I wanted to open it up at this time to any questions that anybody may have for Elizabeth or myself. Oh, and I should say you can use the question and answer box at the bottom and type in any questions that are there, and we will be sure to answer those.
Thank you so much, Lisa and Elizabeth, for sharing information on this really important topic. It was really interesting to hear some of your content. First of all, Lisa, I had no idea, and my husband's an IT, I should have known this, I guess, but I had no idea that we could actually restrict at the router. That seems like the most efficient way to perhaps, restrict our kids a little bit. I am curious, and it's nice to have both you and Elizabeth here who have kids who, a few years older than my own, but natural consequences. If a rule's broken, I I feel like our kids, they need something fast but quick when it comes to consequences. What would you recommend for, I assume we would want to remove the technology for how long?
So I think it depends on their age. And so my thought is I do think removing technology and access is like the biggest way you can do it. I tell people if your kid cries about it or whines about it, you know you've hit a thing that they really care about. And so my thought is maybe it's a day, maybe it's 2 days. I think it would depend on how, like kind of like what the infraction was and how big a deal it was. But my thought is if it's a minor one, I would say a day. If it's something more important, I would say 3 days. If it's a pretty big one and you think that their safety or your family safety could be compromised, I think a week is okay. And what's interesting is for some kids, not having access to it and not having to worry about it or think about it actually is very freeing. It's like, okay, now I can actually focus on other stuff. So I think it's something that kind of depends on like what the infraction is. But I do want to empower parents to be in control and to realize that, nobody can really keep your kid safe except you. And so even though it feels virtual and it's not whatever, it's not without consequences. And I have had kids who have, like you said, shared locations, shared family addresses with complete strangers. I mean, things like that can happen. I think everyone likes to think that their kid won't do that, but let me assure you that they could.
Right, right. I would like to encourage everyone once again, please submit questions. I know we forgot to tell you at the beginning of today's session, but if you had any questions come up, or if as we're chatting a little bit more now, feel free to just type in your questions into Q&A and we will roll through those as best as we can. I'm curious as well, and I think some of this might just be personal experience from both of you, but there used to be screen time limitations or guidelines, best practices, only watch 1 hour TV a day during the week. Our kids are online all the time now. Part of it is because they have to be online for school.
Right.
Part of it is we've taken away a lot of their social outlets. So they're, trying to make up for some of that online. When is enough enough? What limitations can we realistically implement?
I mean, that's a great question.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Lisa.
No, I was gonna say, in my personal experience, I will say that I find my son to be much more pleasant and compliant when he has less time on his devices. And that's not even just social interaction, that's playing games and other things. And yes, he's online for school all day. We do school virtually. So he sits in a chair from 8:30 in the morning till 4 in the afternoon with a stretch break here and there. But then the first thing he wants to do is something that he calls relaxing, and for him that is going to his tablet or his game system to play. I had set up some boundaries, like one of his devices, he gets an hour. That's it. And he can choose when that hour is, but after that it shuts off. And unless I put a code in, it doesn't allow him access anymore. And I think it's, that answer is somewhat individual, because I think everybody knows what their individual child or adult with PWS is going to behave like when they don't have that. If you take it away or they don't have as much time as they want, do you invite other behaviors? But I think it's, if you set up rules, and routines, which is very important to them, I think if you set those up from the beginning, whatever your family deems to be appropriate, then they know that expectation and they're likely to adhere to it. But that's why I like my router settings, where if I tell my son it's time to do homework and he's in the middle of a game and I say, okay, you can have 5 more minutes, but after that, and he still tries to push it, I take my phone out, I go to my app, I hit pause, and he's done. He doesn't have an opportunity to argue anymore at that point.
And I would echo what Lisa said. And the idea is that I think for parents, like you said, there used to be all these guidelines and everyone is at home. And I think they've kind of gotten to the point where maybe initially they were like doing exercise or crafts or whatever. I think everybody's just, and I get it. They're tired of it. It's like this, everybody thinking 2021 will be done. I'm like, well, okay, it's not done. And who knows when that's going to happen. But I think I had seen that the CDC estimated that kids and teens are online now 7 to 8 hours minimum a day. And so my thought is that's not healthy for anyone. And I know people who, I do several Zoom meetings a day. After 3 or 4 hours of Zoom, man, I am exhausted. It's a lot. You have to, like, to me, really you have to be attentive. whatever else. And I mean, I have kids who are walking around on Zoom, or their phone, like talking while they're walking around with their parents or eating a meal or whatever else. No, it's not okay. So I think it's this idea of helping them form safe and healthy limits, because again, if they're doing nothing else besides being online, that's not good. Too much is definitely too much.
Yeah, we make sure that there's outdoor time. So my son has to take a walk every day to even just earn the opportunity to have those things, because otherwise he'd sit in that chair, and that sedentary behavior, it's not good for anybody. So I want to make sure that he's getting up and moving about and doing those things before he's given access to those things that he wants.
And using something that they don't want to do in front of something they want is a great way to get them to earn that thing. And so it's not a given that you get access to iPad or phone or games. It's the idea that you earn it. And maybe you earn it by chores or exercise or something else. But the reality is just like with us, I can't not work all day and expect to get paid, right? That's not how the real world works. So for them too, they should be expected to do things they don't necessarily enjoy to get the thing that they do want. And generally for people with PWS, that works really effectively.
Yeah, we've started doing that with showers and getting ready for the evening. So before you get your technology time, your rooms need to be clean, you need to be showered, you need to have your pajamas on. My kids have never moved so fast as they do when you say that. So, I really do appreciate the two of you getting on with us today. There was several links in the presentation. Can we share those with everyone? Can we share the links and share the slides with folks after today's call?
Yep, absolutely.
Okay. So we did record this. I will make this recording available to folks, as well as if you're online today, you'll get an email from us tomorrow that will include the links as well as the slide deck, so that you can refer back to some of this information. So thank you two for joining us. I really appreciate it. I feel like I'm taking a lot away from today's call.
Me too. It was amazing. So
Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Have a good afternoon.
You too.